Welcome to another episode of Eric Wade Whiskey Studies, and we're continuing our study of the history of Scotch whiskey. And while I'm going over my notes, I'm going to be enjoying a glass of the Ardbeg Korvreken. This is my favorite Ardbeg of the core range. My ultimate favorite from Ardbeg is the Ardbeg Dark Cove Committee release, but those are now very difficult to get a hold of, and they're very expensive. This is bottled at 57.1% alcohol by volume, so it is quite a monster. In our last study, we looked at illicit distilling in the Highlands, and then sort of the conflict of transitioning into legal distillation, particularly with George Smith, as he converted over to being a legal distiller. In fact, he had to defend his distillery with firearms. But eventually, the whole area sort of converts over and follows in his footsteps. And then later on, there's sort of actually a little battle over the name Glenlivet. But it's a legal battle, not people shooting at each other and stuff like that. Alrighty. So in this video, we're going to look at one of the most important inventions in Scotch history, which is the continuous still. And as a reminder, our textbook for this class is The Science and Commerce of Whiskey by Ian Buxton and Paul Hughes. I'm not paid to advertise this book. I just think it's a really, really good book to have. And for this current study, you particularly would want to read Chapter 2. Some of the other chapters I'll be gleaning from in other whiskey studies. And it's available from Amazon, but I had to have this sent from the UK, and it's not an inexpensive book, unfortunately. Alrighty, so let's get into our current study. While the 1823 Excise Act was aiding the stabilization and growth of the legitimate Scotch whiskey trade, a member of the Stein family of distillers invented a piece of apparatus that was to revolutionize the entire industry by making it possible to produce grain or Irish whiskey cheaply and in quantity. The continuous still, comprising two interconnected columns, was developed by Robert Stein, a grand-nephew of John Stein Sr., an operator of Kilbeggie Distillery. Now, if that name doesn't ring a bell with you, go back and watch episode 1. We went over the early history of the Lowlands, and we looked at the history of Kilbeggie Distillery and Kentuppens and the Stein family. Robert Stein's invention, patented in 1827, and the successor to a relatively unsuccessful attempt by Cork City mayor and distiller Sir Anthony Perrier to distill more economically, allowed wash made from mash largely composed of unmalted grain to be distilled into alcohol on a far larger scale than was possible in a traditional huge copper still to be found in the large lowland distilleries that produced Irish whiskey. With great numbers of demobilized Irish soldiers in Scotland after the victory at Waterloo, demand was buoyant. So, in case you missed that, there was actually Irish whiskey being made in the Lowlands in Scotland, and the Lowlands actually had a high population of Irish people living and working there. Stein's first continuous still was installed at Kilbeggie Distillery, with subsequent stills being fitted in the Hague-owned distillery at Cameronbridge in Fife during 1827, while a third was placed in Stein's Kirgleston Distillery near Edinburgh. To give an example of the efficiency of the new still, Cameronbridge Distillery turned out some 150,000 gallons, or 682,000 liters of spirit during 1829, while the pot stills at the now famous Macallan Malt Distillery made just about 5,000 gallons, or 22,730 liters in the same year. Now, at this point, you may wonder, well, if these continuous stills can be so much more productive, why does anyone still use pot stills? That's a very good question, but that is for another video. We'll get more into that when I do perhaps a series on whiskey production. Although the Stein still was a great breakthrough, much of the credit for the continuous still, which in essence remains in use today, is due to Anais Coffey. Now, you may have heard of Nika coffee, the Japanese whiskey. It's not the kind of coffee, you have in the morning. It's the last name of Aeneas Coffee, who took Stein's basic design and improved upon it in terms of simplicity and in efficiency, patenting the coffee still in 1830. Ironically, the man credited with creating a boom for Scotch whisky would become largely at the expense of the Irish alternative, was himself an Irishman. Coffey was born in Dublin around 1780 and entered the excise service at the age of 20, rising through the ranks to become Inspector General of Excise in Ireland. He resigned from the service in 1824 to run the Dock Distillery in Dublin, where he installed and developed his continuous still, though some of his experimentation was also carried out at Port Ellen Distillery on the southern shores of the Hebridean Isle of Islay, where Stein also refined his continuous still. Now let's take a little sip because my throat is getting a little bit parched. Wow. That is powerful. It is also really, really rich. A lot of dark fruits, but also there's sort of the citrus in the background. There's a big punch of peat and smoke. Really, really nice. I could go on more and more about this, but I've already reviewed this whiskey. Coffee still comprised of two large parallel columns, the analyzer and the rectifier, parallel to the wash still and spirit still, and a pot still distillery, with internal plates of perforated copper. The first patent still, as they became known, was installed at Grange Distillery in Fife during 1834, having been authorized for use by the government in September 1832. Initially, much of the comparatively characterless spirit produced in Scotland's coffee stills was exported to England and rectified into gin, but mid-century legislation created the situation where a new form of Scotch whisky would take the world by storm.
Care to join me in a belt of scotch?
It's 9:30 in the morning.
Yeah, but I haven't slept in days. Last chance. Oh, yeah.
So today, the coffee still, or the patent still, or the continuous still, all these names refer to the same thing. They're mostly used in Scotland today for grain whiskeys and for producing a grain whiskey that would go into a blend. So single malt Scotch, still using the pot stills, and there's reasons for that qualitatively in terms of the spirit. Is the reason why they still use pot stills over column stills. I could go more into that, but we're going to do that in another series that I do on production. Alrighty, I hope you're enjoying this series on Scotch whiskey history. I'm trying to do these in small, bite-sized pieces because there's a lot of names, a lot of dates, a lot of places, and so there's a lot to remember. But this is sort of a source for notes, so you can always sort of review and go over these again and again and again. I know I will as I prepare to study for the diploma in single malt Scotch at the Edinburgh Whiskey Academy. All right, if you subscribe to this channel, I want to thank you very much for watching. If you haven't yet subscribed, but you like watching my videos, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up and share with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, and other social networking channels. And don't forget to ring the bell to be notified when I post a new video or when I go live. All right, until next time, cheers.